Welcome to Rodney Veal's Inspired By, a production of Public Media Connect, the regional partnership of CET in Cincinnati and Think TV in Dayton. Rodney Veal, our host for this podcast, is an independent choreographer, interdisciplinary artist, and all-around fan of all things arts and creativity, and he's excited to share another great conversation with you. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoy the show, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
So today we are super excited to have a conversation with someone. I get to fanboy out with all of my guests, but this is really fanboying out on because I geek out on design and all things art and visual design. Hannah Beachler, who is from the area, Centerville, Ohio, and Wright State and University of Cincinnati, I call her an iconic production designer because I pulled this from an article in Fast Company that said, like, how many people know of a production designer of a film? But we know who Hannah Beachler is. And so Hannah has a distinguished career that has been going for a while. It didn't start with Black Panther, people. It is definitely a very long and storied career and a journey. An Oscar winner, just someone I just admire her work. And so we're going to have a conversation about all things that inspire her. So here we are. Hannah, thanks for doing this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
This is super cool. So Hannah, full disclosure, I'm a political science major as well as an artist. So I love research. So here I go. I went in. And speaking of going in, so let's start at the very beginning, because my curiosity is, people don't go around as a child, most people go, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a dancer. But how does one land in the position of being, I want to be a production designer? So how did this start? How did Hannah Beachler become Hannah Beachler?
Well, I would say that I definitely had some ideas about what I wanted to do when I was growing up in Centerville. And one of those things was I want to be a fashion designer. And if people knew that about me from the time I was in like 6th grade, 7th grade in art, I was, my art teacher at Tower Heights Middle School, Mrs. Francine Langley, who's now Francine Riley, was a big influence at that time for me. Like, I thought she was the coolest. I mean, she was the coolest. She is the coolest. And so wanted to be around art, and she dressed really cool, and I was into fashion. And, I came from a family with creative background, my father being an architect and my mother being a decorator, interior decorator, off and on, and working with my dad and of course the house that I grew up in. So I knew I wanted to be in a creative field. What that was, I didn't have the language for. Knew I loved movies and knew I loved fashion, but didn't know, how those two things would kind of intersect down the road in a way. So, went to school for fashion design, kind of. When it got more serious and more like a job, I kind of moved away from that, thinking that, that wasn't how I wanted to combine my creativity and work. So I kind of just went out and started to find my own way and fell into, doing some music videos with friends and bands. And I was the person who got the stuff and, didn't have the language for it then. Enjoyed getting the stuff. And then realized that I had this affinity for film. Went to Wright State University, kind of fell upon art department in film school, and realized that's kind of how I related to movies, and what I was really looking at when I was watching movies was the environments. And then from there, moved to New Orleans and then started in the business.
Most people would say, let me move to New York. Let me move to LA. Why New Orleans for production design?
I did, kind of try to figure out, can I move to LA? Can I move to New York? And it was, I had a young son at the time, a toddler, and it was cost prohibitive. And I didn't really know what to do because I knew I kind of couldn't do what I wanted in film at the level in Ohio. And my brother and his wife happened to live but they lived in New Orleans. And he called me and he said, they're making films down here because they had the tax incentive. So a lot of films were coming and crew was being built. It was still new. It was at the beginning. He's like, you should come down here. And I'm like, New Orleans? They have films in New Orleans? But it
So,
was, it was comparable to living in Dayton at the time. It wasn't too expensive. I had some support, family support with my son. I knew people, my brother, their friends and whatnot, his wife here. So it felt a little more doable. It felt more realistic to be able to come to a place like New Orleans. And I didn't know what I was going to find or how much far I would get or if there were really any films at all, but it worked out. It worked out.
I love it. So what was the first project that you did in New Orleans?
It was called Le Boo. It was a children's feature. It was some of the people, I think some of the producers and whatnot that did Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It was very small. It didn't have a lot of money. I was a set dresser. They shot out in 9 Mile Point, which was an old plantation, and they shot around the woods and stuff. And they had this little puppet, this animatronic puppet that never worked called Le Boo. And we would run around and we'd see like the animatronic puppet sitting there and nobody would be around. So we would like put a potato in its hand or stick a cigarette in its mouth. And then they would come to film and Le Boo would be sitting there with a cigarette hanging out with her. And then he would like smoke and not work when they tried to turn him on. And so they had to have like a hand guy. It was really bad.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
That was the first film, but met many lifelong friends on that.
I love it. Well, we all have to start somewhere. I mean, I think we
That's
all have
right.
that. I think as artists, creatives, we all have that first story. It's like, okay, yeah, I was the guy third row in the back on the ballet, just standing there. That's kind of how I started
Exactly.
my career. We all started that way. And one of the things that's really interesting, Hannah, we met before, believe it or not.
Have we?
Yeah, I don't expect you to remember me. I mean,
I'm
that's just really
sorry.
ridiculous. But that's okay. No, come on, please. This is even before all of this. You came to Dayton and you talked. It was a screening of Moonlight.
Okay, I do.
At the Neon Movies and Stuart McDowell, and it was really funny because it was the conversation. You had a Q&A and it was right before Black Panther. And I remembered because I laughed because it was probably worst laugh. I have a really god awful laugh, and you said, somebody said, well, Hannah, what are you going to work on next? And you said, well, I'm in the middle of starting the production of a film called Black Panther. And the room just kind of all gasped. They were all like, and I went, I just started, that's my laugh. And I just thought it was very funny how you described it. And it was just, but that moment before this explosion kind of a thing. So
Who
I had to,
knew?
who knew? Exactly. Who knew? I do remember. And one of the things that, like I said, as a fanboy, because I went to see Moonlight. That was my second time seeing it on the screen because I fell in love with it the first time. And then I started diving in. And so what struck me about the movie and design, and this is why I got excited, I thought, this is the first time I've ever seen a film about Black people that had that European art cinema look and feel, because it was about the emotional response visualized. And I was like, oh, she speaks my language. I'm like, I was actually, I get it. Because I was thinking about one of my favorite films is I Am Love with Tilda Swinton, and I just think about Luca Giordano, and that design of that film is just like, oh, just got me, So I just thought, Hannah does it just like that. So I mean, the question is like, when you were in film school, did those kind of films kind of really speak to you and resonate with you? And that's kind of how, because you really capture emotion in design. I think that's just a gift. So I'll shut up.
It really was in film school. We had we had a bunch of really great professors, but my theory professors, Dr. Lafferty and I can't believe I can't remember my
Okay,
we were
that's
there for
good.
so long. But anyways, Dr. Lafferty, and they would show a lot of films during the 60s and 50s from Europe, mostly France. We're talking about the Nouvelle Vague, the French New Wave. And I never was really into that. I like didn't connect to that. But when they showed me the Italians, Michelangelo Antonioni, Bertolucci,
Mhm.
Pasolini, even Lena Wertmüller, Fellini, I suddenly understood in a way that I had not understood before. And I think it was because a lot of those films were absent dialogue and the emotion was conveyed within the environment, which was a thing that I kind of keyed into in films, anyways. So when I was watching, Michelangelo Antonioni's trilogy, L'Avventura, La Notte, La Clip, Red Desert, I felt what the design was doing in as much as the emotion of it, the use of color, the way that Antonioni, or Ferdinando Scarfiati, to be quite exact, used color not only in his European films, but when he came to the United States and did Scarface and Empire of the Sun and some of the bigger films that he did here. And I just it just spoke to me. Like I just understood it and it just made sense. And I think in a way because I kind of grew up that way with that sensibility of that aesthetic being part of an emotional response. So yeah, I was drawn to that. I actually did a screening of Il Conformista, Bertolucci's Il Conformista, at the
Mhm.
Egyptian Theater in LA, and then did a talk about it afterwards about Ferdinando Scarfiati. And watching it again on the big screen, I was like, yes, this is the one that really said, this is what I want to do. Like the color, of course, Storaro was the cinematographer, famous Vittorio Storaro. And the way that he used color inside of like gathering information about the characters, really setting us in a place, in a time, just all of it. I was just it was breathtaking to me. And then I got onto the Coen brothers, who very much did the same thing.
Did
Uh,
very much so.
and I started studying Nancy Haig and their set decorator and the designers that they worked with, and how they were sort of their process and doing those same things in a very American filmmaking way. And then of course Spike Lee, he was doing the same things. When Thomas, bringing a very a sense of emotion through stylization and sort of that kind of looking at a frame as though it was a piece of art. And several films do that, but those are the ones and the directors that sort of spoke to me.
I love it because in my research as that poli sci person, when Thomas, because in this article it talks about it, and it made me. I went back and watched Malcolm X because of, which is one of my favorite films, and seen it in a different lens because you mentioned him in an article in Fast Company, and it mentions him as one of the first African American, considered to be one of the first African American production designers, which we that's a, it's America, but it shouldn't be, but it is. Sorry, not sorry. So it says that you consider him a mentor, and I'm like, do you guys talk? I mean, is there a conversation with Black creatives and that I imagine in my head? It happens here in Dayton, but does it happen in the film world?
Absolutely. Apps 100%. When I was coming up, I was still working in New Orleans, and I had, decided to become a production designer, and I had maybe a couple small feature horror film type things under my belt at that time as
Mm-hmm.
production designer. And, I had reached out to Win just for guidance. Win has held up 1,000 Black creatives on his shoulders over the decades. And I knew of him, and I've kind of found my way to sending him a letter. And he called me right when I was about to, like, well, I was in one of the moods where I was like, I'm quitting. I'm not doing this. I can't do this. I was really ready to, like, I'm going to find another pursuit. Maybe I'll do interior design. So Win calls me right on the, precipice of this. And he kind of shook me up and gave me a good shaking on the phone and said, get it together. What are you doing? Shook me a little bit. And I thought I was going to, cry on his shoulder. And he was like, no, get to work, and gave me some really wonderful advice that I followed. He told me, he's like, stop doing these horror films and only do films that you connect with and relate to. And I was like, oh, that's easy for you to say. I got to pay bills. And how do you say no to a job? And
Right.
then he's like, don't do these horror films anymore. Start thinking about that. He's like, get an agent. And I was like, again, easy for you. You're Wynn Thomas. Like, nobody knows who I am. So he told me all these things, and I got off the phone and I wiped away my tears, and I went back to my apartment and I got on the line and I started looking up agents. I'm like, well, Wynn said to get an agent. So I probably sent, 60 emails, just email after email. Everybody said no. And one finally was like, well, we'd love to talk to you. And I was like, somebody wants to talk to me. Okay. So that's when I kind of went on board with Datner Despoto Associates in LA, and they became my agents at the time. And so I was like, okay. And then, the second real big piece of advice was just do the things that you love. And the first script that agent brought to me, Danica Pupa, was Fruitvale Station.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
So, and that changed almost everything. So Danica sends me this. She's like, now I'm sending you this script. It's really small. They don't have any money. It's this real young director. He's done a couple shorts that are really good. They have no money to bring you out there. They have no money to put you up. They have no money to, give you gas money or any of it. But, it's a great script. So I was like, okay, let me read the script. And man, I read that script and I called her up and I said, I have to do this movie. This script is out of this world. And she's like, okay, well, let me get you a meeting with the director. And his name is Ryan Coogler. And,
Yes.
I said, okay. And so we got on Skype. And I mean, I hadn't designed enough stuff. I made a collage on my wall of Oakland. So pictures that I had cut out and made this giant collage. And I'm holding the computer up to the wall in the interview, like, showing him this collage that I had taped to the wall of all the things this sort of the colors of Oakland, the vernacular design and architecture, some of the history, how I saw the story sort of woven through all of those things. And I'm holding the computer. And then we had other technical issues because for some reason he was flipped upside down and then I was flipped up. So we did this really crazy interview and he's like, well, we're talking to some other people and we should know something in a couple weeks and we'll call you back and let you know what direction, either way that we go. And I hung up, closed the computer and opened it back up and, was emailing my friend like, oh, I had this great interview. And then I was sitting on my bed. I had my dog with me, a pit bull, Dante sitting next to me. And I looked over at my computer and the Skype was ringing. It was like 45 minutes after this interview and it said Ryan Coogler. And I'm like, ooh, I wonder if he accidentally accidentally hit the Skype.
Right.
So I walk over to my computer and I hit, picked it up and here comes Ryan upside down on the screen. Still can't get that together. And, we're both flipping the computer all different ways. And he's like, well, I'd love for you to come on this show. Do you want to do this show? And I was on this movie and I was like, absolutely 100% want to do this. Like, when can I start? So we did that. And then I realized how do I get out there? What do I do?
What do you do if there's no budget?
I made some phone calls. I found a couple people helped me find some dog sitting jobs in Lafayette, right outside of Oakland. So I dog sitted a couple corgis and then for the second half of the movie, I dog sitted a Dalmatian. And that was how I stayed, because I could stay for free if I,
if you dog sat, right.
That's right. So I drove out to Oakland by myself, packed up my car, drove out to Oakland, was dog sitting and driving back and forth from Lafayette to Oakland, which wasn't very far. It was probably about 30 minutes or something. And sleeping on couches and sitting, walking dogs. And that's how I met Ryan Coogler.
That's how you met dog sitting. Okay, so necessity truly is the mother of invention. I'm telling you, folks, and this podcast, I'm like, this is for people listening. You got to do whatever it takes. Don't.
That's right.
Yeah, it's like, come on, folks, dog sit, car wash, whatever. Come on, make the artwork happen. I mean, my first job was I was a bookseller. I sold books. I was dancing at night and selling books during the day. I mean, hence all the books behind me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was real, very real. So, I mean, so it was because it was only in that article, and because I kind of went and looked at some of these other folks that were mentioned in the article, and I hope I don't say his name wrong. Akeen McKenzie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, talk about, you talked about that whole notion of Black Hollywood, and the article really did talk about, you talked about being a Black creative in Hollywood, and it's not necessarily that there's a lack of Black creativity, it's a lack of more people in positions of power to green light the Black creativity.
That's
So
right.
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's just dive into that one real quick. So I mean, it's real. I mean, it's 2023, and we're still having that conversation. Is it something you still encounter even with the success that you have?
I do. I think that, I love the projects that I work on. I love the stories that I've been a part of telling, and I will continue in that way. But there's a lot of things that I don't get because I'm a Black woman, and I think there's the thought that I won't be able to tell that story outside of like a Black story. There's a sort of pigeonholing, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
into this thing, because I would love to explore with many directors. I've had the opportunity to work with many different directors like Soderbergh and Todd Haynes and Barry Jenkins and whatnot. But I would love to work with the Coen brothers. I would love to work with Scorsese. I would love to, of course, he's close to designer. I would love to work with David Fincher. And so, but, I don't think that they look at me and think like, oh, you can do that type of a film because you do, Ryan Coogler films or, a Moonlight or Beyonce, work with Beyonce. So there is that. And then there is the ownership, right? There is this idea that, while there is many Black creatives, like you said, in front of the camera, and actors and directors and producers, you don't have Black people owning studios and production companies. And you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
and you have that coming up more and more. Like Ryan and Coogler has Proximity now productions, and Michael B. Jordan has Outlier Productions, and Issa Rae has a first look development deal with Netflix, and Ava has Array. But that's 4 out of all of them. So
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's we need more power behind and capital behind Hollywood that is Black owned, so you can greenlight the stories. And it's very political, and it's all, you know what I mean, there's a
Right.
whole lot of things you have to go through. But I think that is why you're not getting the same green light that you're getting, because it's the equity and the equality and who owns what is not where it should be in this 21st century that we live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big factor in it. Certainly power, even when I'm trying to hire, it is an instant when I want to bring Black folk in to work in positions like art directors and set designers. Suddenly we need to do weeks of vetting. Are they qualified? Well, it says here on this piece of paper that they are qualified. But the opposite is true.
Mm-hmm.
If it is, say, a cis white man, we don't really have to look that hard, and obviously they're qualified. But I have to jump through hoops and fight the fight if I want to bring a Black woman into a position, that's a very well-paid position,
Mm-hmm.
that people might see as taking away that job from a white man. That's the truth. Or from the gate, it's very gate kept. You have the people that bring their people with them over and over and over and over and over and over again, and those jobs are closed down.
Right.
But when you get to me as a production designer, I'm like, well, no, I don't want to bring all your people. I have people that I want to bring into the fold because they could use a Black Panther on their resume to get their next 20 jobs, right? That's going to change the trajectory of their career and their movements and how they can rise up in this industry if they can put Black Panther on their resume and it's a successful billion-dollar franchise. Or even Creed or Moonlight or any one of these that have won Oscars or have broken $100 million. That does something for you in your career. the reason that you don't have as many Black people then rising is because you don't have that. You don't have people that are being let into these coveted positions on these big movies, or even movies that are going to go a long way. When we did Moonlight, nobody thought that movie was going to do anything. We were like, maybe it'll get into a film festival, and that's all we really want,
Interesting.
is to have any kind of audience,
Right.
and then it won Best Picture for an Oscar. I mean, who thought nobody thought that. So, same with Fruitvale, we were just like, I hope that Sundance gets it and
Right.
we'll accept it. And then, it wins awards. So those things that people think like, oh, nobody's gonna, because there wasn't a market for Black stories. So nobody thought like Moonlight or Fruitvale or any of these stories were ever going to do anything, because people aren't interested in that. But we've now seen that people are interested in that.
Right. I mean, let's be very real that on Netflix, that a French production about a cat burglar with Omar Sy was a hit in subtitles. Right. Come on, folks. It's really real. It was because the story was compelling. He's magnetic. Yes. I mean, so it really, I understand the cultural gatekeeping. Speaking from my own perspective of dance, because almost inevitably someone thinks I'm a modern dancer. I said, no, ballet dancer. Yeah. I dance in a ballet company. This was not no diss to modern, and I can do it. I can do a flat back with the best of them. But it's just, but if the perception is that you can only do one thing, okay, yes, it just is very limiting. And I think our audience needs to hear that. So I'm glad you said that. Okay. So we're going to take a little break, because we're going to dive into, you did mention some of these other projects, and we're going to talk about them. So we're going to take a break for the podcast, and then come back and talk to Hannah.
I'm Anne Motolanti, a member of the Inspired by team and a series producer of The Art Show. If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd love to tell you about The Art Show, also hosted by Rodney Veal. Each week, Rodney profiles the worlds of art, music, dance, and theater in and around Southwest Ohio, along with cultural highlights from across the nation. Stream it now on the official Art Show YouTube channel or on the PBS app. Thanks, and now back to the show.
All right, so we're back. Okay, so you already mentioned the productions earlier, and this is one of the things that I was talking, when I talked to my students about the fact that I was interviewing you, and these are dance students, and they all went, how is it possible that she was connected to three of the most iconic cultural things in our pop culture? Moonlight, Black Panther, and Beyonce's Lemonade. I said, yeah, we all hope for one thing in our lives. Hannah got three. So I was like, so the students want to know, like, what is it like when you, because you talked about it earlier about, that struggle, that first job, you were doing the horror films. I did see that on the IMBD, which I learned. I was like, wow, there's a lot of horror films here. I was like, okay. And I mean, I was like, well, we all got to start somewhere.
We do.
Like I said, I'm in the core in the back. I'm peasant number 3.
Right.
I totally get it. So I love the fact that you dog sat in order to get to Oakland. I think that is just, mind blows me in many ways. So one of the things I pulled up it was an interview that you did at Harvard, and it was Harvard for the Harvard design that turned into, they transcribed the conversation into a book.
I see it there.
Oh yeah, right there.
Design in a frame of emotion. Yeah.
Right. I told you, I went in. I was like, let me watch, let me read. I was like, what I loved about and this is, it goes with that conversation. You said when you got the project for Lemonade, you only heard one song. I'm like, I was like, you should have seen my face. I was like, how do you design for an album that is so, one, after hearing it in hindsight, so multi-dimensional? Yeah, it got robbed for the Grammy, but I'm just gonna say it, and I dare anybody to come at me. I'm like, and how do you design for something when you have that small of a nugget of information? And what's that like? I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, first I had a nervous breakdown.
You were like, what?
I was. Well, and it's funny because when they called me about that project, they were like, well, there's a, hey, they're like, I just got done doing Moonlight, and like a couple weeks later, they're like, we have this project with this pop star. Are you interested? And I was like, pop star. I was like, and instantly when they said pop star, I was like, it's Taylor Swift. I was like, I'm not interested. And I just got back from Miami and I was home, I wanted to be home for a while. And I thought, I'm not interested in doing it for, like, who could it be? Pop star. I'm not interested.
Right.
And so they called like 2 weeks later. And I was like, okay, well, now they keep calling. I'm like, maybe there's something about this that I should be doing this. And I thought, okay, I said, fine, I'll do this pop star thing. It's going to be in New Orleans. I'm home. That's great. They're like, well, we need you to come down. And they kept calling the pop star Lemonade. And I was like, oh, they're like, Lemonade is going to meet you at the hotel. And, you guys can talk about the project and the creative. And I'm like, Lemonade? I guess some new pop. I have to ask I said to my son, I said, who's a pop star named Lemonade?
Lemonade.
And he was like, nobody. Who are you talking about? And I'm like, I don't even know. So I go to this hotel and I'm standing there. I'm talking to producers and the director was there and we're all talking and the cinematographer was there, Chase Irving, who shot Black Klansman. And they're like, oh, here comes Lemonade. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to see who this Lemonade is. And I turn around and it's Beyonce. And I was like, well, that's not Lemonade. I was like, that's not Lemonade. I was like, my breath was taken away. I'm like, it's Beyonce. I'm like, Well, and I was a fan. I mean, I was trying to talk to her, but couldn't stop staring at her face. She's beautiful. And I mean, just like everything is perfect and she's real tall. And I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, it's like trying to have a conversation and it's like, I couldn't and I've talked with so many stars and whatever, and it's never been like that where I'm just like, I cannot focus. So I'm like, pull it together, Hannah, pull it together. Yeah. And she basically was like, here's the idea. Here's the overarching story of what this is about, where we want to go with it and how we want the feeling to be and what this is. And then she was like, okay, and then here, go. And then I had a nervous breakdown because I was like, oh, there's no script, right? It's not like a movie where you can break it down and start really thinking about. It was sort of this very it was like stream of consciousness, like design, very subjective. And so, yeah, I was like, what do I do? And I was just like, one step at a time. Like, if you are as good as you think you are, you should be able to do this. And so it was one step at a time. I was like, get that old metal bathtub and some hay and some candle. You know what I mean? And
you start to pull.
Yeah, because it was minutes. It was like when we started shooting and everything, we had gathered a bunch of stuff and it was all in locations. And it was literally like she's landed at the location and walking, and I didn't have a set. And I was having a nervous breakdown for real because I didn't know what to do. And then I love her so much and I love Beyonce and I love her music that I kind of like paralyzed. Like, this can't be wrong. And so it was having a writer's block basically in real time. You only had like 5 minutes to get it moving. And you had no time to sort of get past it. You had to just go. So I just sort of forced myself forward and started just create a space that you love and that you think she would look very beautiful in, something natural, something we're in this one area of this location. And it became really the image that you see of her in regards to Lemonade in that tub with the scarf on her head. And and then once I got past that, it became very simple. I just knew, I understood, like, okay, just move forward with this. And she's so lovely and kind and giving that it made it even easier. So I didn't need to be so nervous and whatnot. So yeah, you kind of just one foot in front of the other and take her notes and create something. And if she has a change, you make it, you pivot. And I've been very lucky to where she's been happy with what I've done for her in Black is King and Lemonade, and then On the Run 2 tour that we shot in Jamaica. Yeah, the interstitials for that.
I think that's a good housekeeping seal of approval if she says Black is King, come to my tour. I mean, so that's, that's what fascinated me. Like, you were literally making like improvisational creative design choices.
Yes.
But yet still maintain, like, I'm in awe of this, in that sense of that collaboration, that it came together in a way that people now still refer. There's so many people I go, yeah, you're trying to do that and you should stop. They got it right the first time. Don't do that. Don't don't embarrass yourself. It's yeah, because it will never have that sense of death because you talked about in that conversation you had at Harvard about feelings, and we talked about it in this podcast. You can't fake a feeling. You can't fake it. I mean, you can fake an intellectual discourse. I mean, although I
Yes.
study politics, God knows I know how that works, and that's why I didn't choose that path. Thank God. But you can't fake a feeling, and it's the same thing with dance. That movement has to be generated from a source.
Yeah.
You could place your port bra, but you can you. I've always loved how I've approached dance, and I think that this will set me apart. And I don't know if you know of this dancer, Carmen de Lavalade, who was Jeffrey Holder's wife. I
Really?
loved, yes, and she is. I think she's in her 90s, and she has this presence that still at this day, when the curtain goes, like she's still performing, and so
Wow.
when she stands on stage and she just moves her arms, people
Mm,
just stand up and applaud. It's just that innateness. And so
yes.
I was thinking, well, bring the black people in to show you how it's done. It's,
Hmm.
but it's just really, we come from that rich culture. And
Yes.
I'm wondering, because, and this kind of segues us into Black Panther, because, and that other thing is like, okay, a 500-page handbook. Okay.
Yeah.
Hannah, that's a lot of research.
It's
that's, that, that, that's not for mere mortals. Just don't. I mean, but the film, because you did build the worlds, it took that much, didn't it? I mean,
It really did. I mean, because where do you start to build an entire civilization, society?
mhm,
How do you start? Well, I'll tell you one thing that I really started with was my father, who was an architect. He's passed, my adopted father. He would say to me, I'd always be like, Dad, could you just draw me a house, design me a house, and one day I'm gonna build this house
yeah,
that you designed. He'd say, I can't do that because I need to know what the land looks like before I can design anything. And I was always like, oh, you just don't want to design. But now I understand what he means, because I thought, okay, where do you start with Wakanda? And I went right back to that. And I was like, well, I have to know what the land looks like. And so that's how it all started for me, was where is it on the continent of Africa? How big is it? What does it look like? What does the topography look like? What is the terrain? Where did everybody migrate from? Why did they migrate there? Then the next thing, once you have the land, which is inherently there in the world,
mhm,
people come to it. That's the beginning of a society, right? And so where did they come from, and what are they bringing to create this society? So I had to delve into all of that, dating back. Well, I went back on the continent like 325,000 years. But, for
wow,
Wakanda, it was only 12,000 years back. But I had to go back as far as I could, and that would be the Impulonga Empire, that they're still dating, but is about 225,000 years old, the oldest civilization on Earth.
mm,
And, basically that's what Impulonga is. And so it's like, okay, so and then fast forwarding it to like, okay, climate was a reason people moved, resources is another people moved. So I brought everybody to Wakanda, and then we started building, because they're going to bring what they know from the environment, that in the climate that they come from. They're going to be specialized or be experts in something, and then those parts of Wakanda is where those people. And then we create a capital, much like a place like New York, where all the different tribes would come,
mhm,
and we have our university there, we have our palace there, we've got our records hall there, we've got all of the things, our civics and our hospitals and stuff. And then each district that was a tribe evolved into being a specific thing. Merchant tribes were the traders. They traded goods, and they're the ones who kind of oversee all of the goods and the trading. The river tribe is the purveyor of the river. They replenish it, they take care of it, they live on it. They
mm,
use aqueducts that we know existed in Mali in the 4th and 5th century to take water in backwards, because that exists, to their crops. So they were rich in agriculture, and they're slower, so they're more analog. They have access to technology, but chose to do things analog. How did Wakanda get technology? Well, we started to research how a meteor comes into the atmosphere. How big does it have to be to create enough vibranium for them to subsist on for hundreds of thousands of years without destroying the Earth? So, we had to have a white star and a giant red star explode at certain points in times as the meteor was entering the atmosphere and hitting at a certain place, which also created craters from the fall off of the meteor, which also created some of the topography. That's why we have Jabari Mountain is treated very differently when it comes to vibranium. The vibranium dusted over that area, so went into the soil and affected the flora and fauna. So the Jabari, you'll see, have a lot of wood. Our influence for that is the Dogon in Mali. They're master craftsmen with wood. So their wood, as it grew out of the ground that had been saturated with vibranium, when you bring it to a certain burn point, it becomes like steel. So you'll notice, they have what looks like burnt wood a lot of the time around in their buildings. And so you just keep logically kind of going through it, and then you get to 500 pages because you have to explain, like in the first one, the border tribe, what was their specialization, what was their job, and why do they have rhinos? How do they have rhinos? Well, when they're young and they're coming of age, the baby rhinos choose the person that their keeper, basically.
Oh, wow.
So then there's a whole ceremony about the baby rhino choosing their person. That's why Daniel Kaluuya's character Kabi was so close to that specific one that ends up licking Okoye up the face. That's why there's that relationship with that animal. So I had to write about sort of why that exists and how they raise and grow, and learning about herd animals in the big five on the continent and some of the shelters that do take care of these animals, and what are the types of things that they would have had to do. So there was that 500 pages. There was 400 pages of just what the countryside looks like, what the land looks like. And then there was another 414 pages for Talakon, and an additional 500 pages for bringing that to 1,000 pages.
Okay, so that basically tells me that David Fincher should be calling you right now. It's like, if you don't think that Hannah Beachler could design your world, you're sadly mistaken. And it's really funny because I at the time when Black Panther came out, I was still teaching in high schools, and there were students who really did think Wakanda existed, and we had to talk them off the ledge, like, no. It's fictional, but a lot of work went into making it seem real. So it was like, so kids, I mean, and I even posed the question because one of the things I took away from how you pulled all this together, because it was the biggest speculative fiction of a what if. There is no colonization.
None.
And look what we ended up with.
Yes.
1,000 pages and a fully realized world that has people believing that they're going to get on a plane and go there. And I'm thinking, wow. I was like, that was a lot. That was a lot to do. And I just think that speaks volumes. That just speaks volumes to that. Is that typical of production design to be that detailed, or is that just the Hannah Beachler effect?
I mean, I've had people say I might do too much. I don't know that that's typical, but I often times for in movies that you see whole worlds are built. I can't say what every designer's process is. It certainly is mine. I know it's probably not the average, that amount of research and that amount of detail, and creating a history and using critical fabulation in that way for both Talakon and the Wakandans. I have
second film.
Yeah,
Which I saw.
Yes, and a funny anecdote on the first film, when we filmed a lot of the built sets in Atlanta. So I'd be walking, scouting and out and about in Atlanta, and people would be like, "So where are you from? Where are you from?" And I would always be like, "Oh, I'm an architect in Wakanda. I'm from Wakanda." And they'd be like, "Well, where's Wakanda at?" And I was like, "It's on the continent. It's in Africa." "Oh, but where is Wakanda in Africa?" I was like, "Well, it's on the border of it's by Lake Kivu on the border of DRC, and Uganda is right there, and Burundi. We're like kind of in between all of that, like by the impenetrable forest. Oh, okay. Be like, yeah, born and raised in Wakanda, and people will be like, okay, I'll have to visit that. Sounds inspiring. So I kind of had to become a Wakandan architect.
There you go. Wow. Okay, so you totally, yeah. Good call. That's lovely. You should come talk to my high school students. They'd be like, "Oh, it's like, shit. See, you lied to us, Mr. Rodney. There is a Wakanda." I'm like, okay.
You
I
never
love it.
know. There might be.
There might be. There should be. Let's put it that
There
way.
should
And
be.
and so with the second film, and I mean, I love the fact that not did you just create one world, but you created a second world that had the same kind of detail in the history, and it came through. Like I was sitting there just going, "Wow, how does what?" how That's just I'm in awe. That's why I'm a fanboy. I was like, I'm in awe of that kind of detailed research. I was just like, yes, yes. So my curiosity is and I pulled this up, so I'm asking this. I don't know if you could talk about it. Your name is associated with doing a a theater production.
That's right. Because you
You
were
really?
like three things that I was associated, and I was like, it's about to be four.
Oh, it's about to be four, four to hyper. Talk about iconic in the Black world, The Wiz.
That's right. Yeah.
So okay,
I'm
so
currently designing the Broadway revival.
yes, I have. Oh,
That's
is that like a dream come true? I mean,
right. It really is, because I can tell you that when it was touring with Stephanie Mills in the it had to be late 70s. I saw it with my parents. My adopted parents took me to Victoria Theater to see The Wiz.
Wow.
And I was probably 7, 8 years old. And I can remember like being in awe of like this world. Like first of all, there's people that look like me in this fantasy world, full circle, right? In this place that's beautiful and dreamy, and there's challenges, but they make it through, and they look like me, and they're okay, and they're singing, and they're happy, and there's joy, and there's these beautiful sets that keep coming in and out. And how did they do that? Like my eyes were this big, they were huge, they were like saucers, looking at all of that. And those were the little magic of theater. And so when this came to me, I mean, I screamed yes. I was like, this is a full circle back to my childhood. How can I not? It's iconic, Black theater. It changed everything for Black creatives, the way we saw the way Black stories are told. So it means everything to be a part of it. And so, yeah, it's like, I got to do right. I got to do right by this. And so, of course, I'm going all in.
Yeah, you have to. There's no choice. I mean, and we all know it. He's on down. He's on down.
He's on down the road.
Don't nobody bring me no bad news.
Okay,
I mean, it's like,
that's right.
You know what I'm saying? We like that album probably is in every Black house.
That's right.
It's kind of like the Dreamgirls album. It's like that Dreamgirls
That's
album and a VHS tape of The Color Purple.
Okay.
So,
That's right.
That's such a real thing. And I love the fact that you talk about like representation, because it's really important, because especially in fantasy, because I think about, because you self-identified as a nerd. It's a Black nerd.
Yeah.
So do I, because I guess sci-fi was my world. I lived in it. Octavia Butler is the jam. Yeah, she's the jam. Always Arthur C. Clarke. I mean, I was all about big worlds and expansive worlds. Dune. I was like, 10 years old reading Dune. Yeah. I mean, my parents were like, I don't know about you. I don't know about you. And it was because it's how that's important. I mean, it's like we do have rich, vibrant lives and a fantasy. Can we have some fun? Can we have fun too in the fantasy world of the speculative?
Right. So, for me, it's like I would look at things and things that I loved. I think things that we all love because we could relate in a way that it wasn't about looking and having to see us, but we could relate to the feeling that was happening. Like I understand pain or happiness or joy or celebration. So we could relate in that way. People don't have to look like us. And it's something that I think you find more in the Black community, of being able to and having to understand really the world as it is according to whiteness, right? But I feel like, and I might have gotten lost in the question a little bit because I'm just like,
That's okay.
now where was I going? Now what were you saying?
I love what you're talking about, like our world,
Oh,
our
well,
presence in fantasy.
that's
I
right.
mean,
And I
that's
would watch something like Star Wars when I was young, the original Star
yeah.
Wars that came out, and they're in the saloon, the famous saloon. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, now I'm seeing a slug that can talk, and a walking, talking elephant in a space outfit, a lobster that actually has his own aircraft. I'm looking at a rat, I think, and some other alien bauble, and there are no Black people.
Okay,
I
yes,
can see people can imagine an elephant that has a whole civilization and world and is like talking in a human like alien thing. But you
right.
can't imagine a Black person
In space,
in
in another
space
planet,
in the future.
in the future,
Because what
exactly.
we are seeing is what the look this is somebody said this is what I see the future looks like. And it's without Black people.
And which is really bizarre because Ray Bradbury, no, not Ray Bradbury, Star Trek I thought answered that question.
That's right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Come on. I mean, Lieutenant Uhura. I mean, so it's like it's almost like they keep ignoring the answers, and to
Right.
your point. And so that's what I loved about. I think most people, including Hollywood, were shocked how the world responded
Mm-hmm.
to what you have created, and not just with Black Panther. It's like Lemonade and Moonlight. I mean, audiences did respond.
Yes.
Moved. I mean, I heard people were weeping in Moonlight.
Yes.
I cried. I just thought, oh wow, wow, okay. I could see the story continuing, and I was satisfied. So I mean, so I got to I'm okay, done with the fanboying. We telling people, okay, Hollywood fantasy worlds do include Black people.
They do.
What they do. What would be your advice? Because we talked about we talked briefly about it, but there are those who still want to be the Black creative. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell someone who is a Black creative wanting to come into this industry? Like one, other than the two pieces, a nugget of information from Win, what would you tell them that they should think about before they embark on the journey?
Well, I think before you embark on the journey, some of the things that you need to think about are what specifically is it that I'm seeking? Do I want to direct? Do I want to produce? Try to find the place you want to be. I think it as a whole, that makes it easier entering the film industry. Sometimes it takes a little bit to figure out where you want to be, and you got to kind of try jobs and okay, this isn't really what I want to do. But if there's a passion that you have, music or costume design or making props or building or designing or architecture, and you want to apply it to the film world, know what that is. Okay, I want to be in the art department. I'm not quite sure what position, but I'm going to be in the art department. I think that is an advantage if you know going in, and then you can focus purely on what is the path to get to the place in that department that I want to be. If I want to be a director, what are the steps that I possibly need to take to be that? What is my path? Instead of doing 800 different things, because when department heads are looking at your resume or looking at what you're doing as a PA, even, or when you're first starting, they're going to want to see that you want to be in their department. When I look at people's resumes, I'm like, oh, it doesn't seem like this is where they want to be. Rather, this is just a job, because when you come into my department, I want to teach you. I want to take you under my wing and bring you up. But I don't want to exclude someone else who really wants it because you're not sure if you do,
Oh,
So it's like, I'm looking for
yeah.
people that I can move into position, right? I'm looking for people who then can become, observe, do, and become. Those are my 3 steps. You observe,
Yes.
do, and become. So that's also something that you can take. Know when you're going into the film industry that you're learning. Everything is a lesson. My horror movies that I did, awful, all of them. Really tiny little, throwing blood everywhere. But what
Yeah.
I learned was how to manage a
Mm.
department. I learned how to do a budget. I learned how to have meetings with producers.
Mhm.
I learned how to do my own site plans and what it means to build and how to cost things. So while these movies didn't become, the thing, these great,
Works of art,
that's
but
right. They're not going down in any history.
no.
However, I learned a great deal that I wasn't going to learn in any school. And that's the
Mm.
hands-on aspect. And
Mhm.
also dealing with all the different personalities and who am I going to be in this industry? What type of, department head and leader am I going to be? As I go through this industry, I was able to figure out like, all right, I am the one who, I say it like it is. I might not be the easiest. I'm the loyalist. I'm going to bring you with me. I'm going to teach you, and I'm going to be hard on you because I know you're good. And anything that comes from me is from love because I want to see you succeed. That's the type of person that I decided in my learning journey, in my becoming part of my journey, from all of the things I learned on these small films. Like, I don't want to be that type of designer on, I don't like the way they treated me, or I don't like the way they spoke to their crew. That isn't of benefit. That didn't make the job go easier or anyone have fun or them work harder or me work harder. It just kind of made me feel sad. And it made me feel like, why? What was the purpose? Because you didn't
Mm.
even get what you wanted. So I could learn how to become what I am right now from all the jobs that I was observing.
Mm.
See? So I would say do that. Take a chance. The opportunity is all around you. It's not as if you have to wait for the golden ring. You have to grab the golden ring.
Mm.
And to be outside of your comfort place, to go into a place that you are new to, don't know, and it could be a little scary. Bravery is doing the thing you're afraid to do, but doing it anyways. And that's the dog sitting in Oakland. I didn't know any of these people. I just was like, I'm going to watch these two corgis, but I'm also going to get to do.
You're going to get to do.
I'm going to get to do this
Mm.
film. And I look back at Fruitvale Station between prep and shooting. I was in Oakland for 5 weeks. I was on
Wow.
Wakanda Forever for 2 years, you know,
Wow.
and I thought that was like 5 weeks. Oh my gosh, it's so long. But I was able to start becoming in that moment
Mm.
and find the people who speak your aesthetic language. Find the people that are facing forward with you, right? I found Ryan Coogler. And we spoke the same language of research and understanding, and place is important and color is important, and everything has a story, and it goes well deep beyond the story that you're telling on the surface. I learned that from Ryan, and then I evolved it for myself. So that's how we work together. He's like a griot to me, right? He tells me a story about the people and the place, and I go back and I design the place for the people that he's told me about.
Mm.
And I found my person. He's my work person, my friend, um, my confidant. He's seen me at my best, he's seen me at my worst, and he still loves me dearly, and that says a lot. So,
we all need that, right?
yeah.
We all need that. We need
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
Find those people. They're out there. Find those people. And if it's not someone that you feel like is in the line of work that you want to go in a professional, and if it feeds your creative soul, they're necessary to what you want to do.
Mm.
Right. So that's the best advice I would say. Don't ever give up on yourself. Understand that no one can keep you from what you want. No one can take the light that's inside of you, that's guiding you. They cannot dim that. It doesn't matter what names are called, what da 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 da, what's happening, how you feel. that light shines bright, and the only way that it dims is because you let it. You know, your self-awareness is your golden nugget. Pick it up off the ground, dust off the dirt, and hold tight to it. Reputation is everything. Choose that over money or fame. Choose your reputation over that, because it will take you further, right? Give a man a fish, they'll eat good for a day. Teach them to fish, they'll fish for life. That's your reputation, is that fish, is learning to fish. You're going to have it forever. So that's what I have to say.
You have just said everything I tell every student that I am teaching. I was like, we are separated by birth. It's scary.
And we
was
might
like,
be.
we might be. Hannah, that is the best. That's the best mic drop you could ever have for an interview. So, thank you so much for taking time in your day to spend and have this conversation.
It was lovely. I had a wonderful time. Thank you for having me. I have to thank Anne Rodolante for reaching out to me and having me come and do this conversation and have this conversation with you. I really appreciate it.
I ditto. Likewise. It's a pure thing. Oh, that's a thing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Rodney Veal's Inspired By is a production of Public Media Connect, the regional partnership of CET in Cincinnati and Think TV in Dayton. There's a lot of great art happening around Southwest Ohio, and we're excited to be part of it. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can learn more and find the show notes at thinktv.org/inspired by or cetconnect.org/inspired by. Thank you.